Ash still drifted down on the spires of Iraq. It would for days to come. Weeks, perhaps. Rashad was fine with that, he decided. Smoke and ash he could bear. Genocide he could not. Charred forest, filled with the broken trees and the blackened corpses of his fellow outcast Arakoa, surrounded him. Above it all rose the craggy spires of Skyreach, home of the high Arakoa who had sought to eradicate Rashad's kind. The natural stone towers clawed at the belly of the sky like talons. Atop the highest rested a giant gold crystal, the high Arakoan weapon that had rained down death and destruction on the outcasts and their forest home. If Rashad closed his eyes, he could experience it all again. The beam of white-hot fire harnessing the power of the sun, lancing down from the crystal and setting his world aflame. He could hear the shrieks of wood splintering, the cries of the outcasts burning alive. But all of that was over now, he reminded himself. The order that had ruled the High Arakoa with unyielding fanaticism, the adherents of Rukmar, was in shambles. Their weapon was destroyed. From the ashes they left behind, something new was emerging. Slowly but surely, it was emerging. Rashad saw it right before his eyes. The Order of the Awakened. A new society of Arakoa striving to abandon the hatred and rivalries that had ruled their people for generations. In the burned-out forest, former enemies walked as friends. On one side, the wingless outcasts, twisted by the curse of Seth. On the other side, their cousins, the elegant and powerful winged High Arakoa, who had once viewed all things that dwelled below their spires as inferior. About time, Rashad thought. These old bones grow tired. A familiar squawk drew Rashad's attention. A blur of red feathers circled overhead. His Kaleri, Percy, swooped low, clutching a satchel overflowing with scrolls beneath his black talons. "Ah, you found them!" Rashad clapped his gnarled hands. He had sent Percy out to check on one of his caches of scrolls. The crafty scholar had hidden many throughout the forests over the years. "Bring them here." Percy flung the satchel beside Rashad, sending the scrolls tumbling across the sooty grounds. "Ah!" the elder outcast screeched. "Careful, Percival! You know these are fragile." The Kaleri landed on the jagged stump of a tree and shrieked a retort. "Yes, yes," Rashad sighed, digging into a cloth pouch on his gold-trimmed violet robes. His hand emerged, trailing a mix of seeds and nuts. "I haven't forgotten your reward." He scattered it at his feet and wiped his palms on his robes. Percy hopped from the tree trunk and tore through the seeds in a frenzy of beak and talon. "Show some dignity. There are strangers about," Rashad chided as he began looking through the fallen scrolls. He picked through them lovingly, as one would handle Kaleri eggs. They were old histories depicting Arakoan society before it had been divided between those with wings and the outcasts. Apocrypha, law suppressed by the adherents of Rukmar in an attempt to manipulate and brainwash their kind. Rashad carefully placed the scrolls in the satchel, examining each of them for signs of damage from the fires. He stopped at one about Terok, the ancient king who had ruled over the Arakoa, titled Before the Fall. Rashad weighed it in his hand. Such a small thing, he thought. Just ink and parchment. Yet so powerful it could rival even that false sun the High Arakoa had wielded. "Rashad!" An outcast hobbled forward, his ash-streaked feathers the colour of a stormy sky. A High Arakoa, wielding a dark blue leather tunic over teal plumage, marched by his side. "We have not been able to find Iskar," the outcast continued. "Scouts have gone in search of him, but it will be some time before they return." "So be it," Rashad said, a coldness pressing down on him. Shadow Sage Iskar was the leader of the outcasts. His absence was disconcerting. He had seemed aloof and angry in recent weeks, and Rashad wondered about his intentions. Iskar had always been somewhat obsessed with power, a byproduct of his personal history. But what is he after? Is this new society of Arakoa not enough for him, he thought? "Should we be concerned?" the High Arakoa asked. "That remains to be seen," Rashad replied. "Sit. Both of you. Rest." The High Arakoa nodded as he perched atop a fallen tree. The outcast took a seat on a small tree stump nearby, wiping soot from his face. Rashad unrolled the scroll in his hand. The dry parchment was much like him, weathered and frail but full of secrets. He had made it his life's work to collect this knowledge, to teach it to a new generation of his kind. Arakoa who would follow wisdom rather than the prejudice and mindless zealotry of the past. Now he figured was a good time as any to start. "What do you know of Iskar?" he asked, turning to the High Arakoa. "Only that he leads the outcasts." "And what do you know of the ruler of the adherents, High Sage Virix?" Rashad asked the outcast. "The dead High Sage, thankfully," he thought. It was by her will that the High Arakoa had unleashed their weapon, hoping to exterminate the outcasts. "She did all of this." The outcast eyed the shattered woods, voice raw and sharp. "Yes," Rashad continued. "On the surface they seem very different, as some might say the two of you do, but there was a time when they were the same." Adherent Virix tilted the wood scepter over the nest of Ravager larvae. The gold crystal atop the trinket pulsed with warmth and energy, glowing like a sun in miniature. Once again, Virix was mesmerized by the power contained in such a tiny thing. She had crafted the device herself, using artifacts from a lost and highly advanced culture of Arakoa, the Apexis. Signs of its presence littered the land around the spires of Skyreach. Most of Virix's kind considered Apexis artifacts to be nothing more than novelties. She was one of the few who believed there was something to be gained from studying them. One day, she thought, they will see things my way. The crystal grew brighter until a beam of gold fire exploded from the stone, lancing over the larvae. The tiny grubs squirmed, their skin melting and bubbling under the heat. "Put them out of their misery already," Adherent Iskar called out. The purple-feathered Arakoa paced nearby, adorned in the gold bangles and dark blue hood and raiment that marked him as a sun sage. He was a strange Arakoa in many ways, hunched and small for his age, not the brightest or the most promising of the sages, but despite all of that, he was Virix's friend, her clutch brother. She found Iskar's peculiar look and quirks endearing. "You're not getting sentimental, are you?" Virix asked. "Of course not, but we will be late," Iskar hissed. "The Eldars commanded us to return by nightfall. They also told us to clear out the pests. Thoroughly. But we will be late. That's how we got into this mess in the first place." Virix bristled in annoyance, but she also felt a pang of regret. It wasn't Iskar's fault they were out here, she reminded herself. She had been late to the dawn ritual yesterday. The punishment for her transgression did not end with her. Years ago, the Elders had paired Virix and Iskar together, as they did with all young adherents. Doing so meant the fledgling members of the Order could watch over each other and ensure that everyone followed the decrees of their sun god, Rukmar. If one accomplished a great feat, both would be showered with praise. Likewise, if one transgressed, both would be punished. And so here they were, in the dirt beneath Skyreach, exterminating troublesome ravagers. The mindless insects often encroached on Arakoan territory, building their stinking nests among the rocks of the spires. Purging ravagers was a menial task, especially for sun sages like Virix and Iskar. They had trained their whole lives to wield Rukmar's fiery power as their own, to call down her light as a weapon against their enemies. Still, some part of Virix enjoyed the task. She was out of Skyreach, out from under the watchful eyes of the Elders. She was free, and she wanted to savor that feeling for as long as possible. "They will understand," Virix said. She looked out across the grassy hills that rose and fell like waves around the rock spires. Charred Ravager corpses lay on their backs, long spindly legs reaching towards the sky. "We did good work. They won't punish us for that." "They won't punish you," Iskar said. Virix opened her beak to offer a retort when something agile scrambled from a tangle of thorn bushes nearby. Another Ravager. The large, mottled grey insect skittered across the ground, disappearing into a dense forest just ahead. "Leave it," Iskar pleaded. But Virix was already in pursuit. "We have our orders, Clutch Brother." "Thoroughly." "We will get the whip for this," Iskar thought as he stumbled after Virix. "Correction. I will." That was how it always was. The Elders always punished him more than his Clutch sister, no matter who was at fault. He knew the reasons. Virix was brilliant. Everything from their studies in wielding Rukmar's powers to understanding the sciences came so easy to her. Even her looks, her pale red eyes and pink feathers, were considered beautiful among their society. She was a model adherent on her way to great and glorious things. But Virix did have her faults. She was disobedient, spontaneous, and restless. She reveled in breaking the rules whenever possible, probably because there was never a real cost. Because of her gifts, Iskar believed, the elders lessened the severity of her punishments. Try as Iskar did to please his elders, he often made some foolish mistake. He wasn't perfect like Virix. He should have envied and hated her for being born gifted, but he didn't. When others scorned him, she always stood by his side. She always protected him. Iskar wished only that one day she would understand the consequences of her little adventures and acts of rebellion. It wouldn't happen today. Iskar shivered from the cold that closed in around him. The thick forest canopy blotted out the last light of the setting sun. He stepped carefully over massive roots, his talons digging into wet mud. Strange wood and stone talismans swayed from ropes attached to the branches overhead. They were crude effigies of Arakoa. Sticks of incense burned in the closed talons of the figurines, sending ribbons of smoke through the forest. The bitter odour made Iskar's eyes water. They had gone too far. This was the land of the others, those Arakoa who had fallen from Rukmar's grace, the cursed wingless creatures who dwelled in the dirt beneath the spires, the outcasts. Iskar said a silent prayer to Rukmar. He pulled his dreamcatcher from beneath his thick raiment. He clutched the circular wooden talisman, leather cords crisscrossing at its center, tightly in both hands. Iskar held the dreamcatcher in front of him, just as the elders had taught him. It would act as a net to capture the curse that afflicted the outcasts and protect him from its withering effects. In his head, Iskar was already planning how he would hang the dreamcatcher outside his roost when he returned to Skyreach. By midday tomorrow, Rukmar's light would cleanse the befouled trinket of whatever vestiges of the curse it contained. "We are forbidden to come here without the guidance of the elders," Iskar said as he caught up to Virix. "Please, just give up." "Quiet. Look." Virix pointed forwards. Iskar gazed across the forest. All he saw were trees and shadows. "I do not see the Ravager." "Forget the Ravager. I have found something more interesting ahead." Then Iskar saw it, a form, an Arakoa. It was skulking among the gnarled trees. Brilliant red feathers peeked out from beneath the figure's ratty cloak. Iskar judged that it was a male from its gait and size. The mysterious Arakoa also walked upright, meaning he was not an outcast. He was one of Iskar's kind. "He should not be out here alone with the ceremony starting soon," Virix said. "Yes, the one we are supposed to attend," Iskar replied. Today marked the start of Rukmar's grace, a time of the year when the sun was at its highest and the days were long and bright. All adherents were required to attend the ceremony and perform rites, a fact that Virix seemed to shrug off so easily, despite Iskar's warnings. "Aren't you the least bit curious about what he's doing?" Virix said. "Not particularly. The longer we linger here, the worse our punishment will be." Virix said nothing. She darted forward and then took wing, flying up into the tree canopy. Stubborn, Iskar thought as he followed. Foolish. They tracked the strange Arakoa deeper into the woods, alighting on the branches of one tree after another. This was a land that Iskar knew the outcasts called Vale Acras. Crude huts, draped in rune-etched violet cloth, dotted the dim forest. The only illumination, if one could even call it that, glowed from the purple orbs spaced haphazardly through the forest. "Please," Iskar gripped Virix's shoulder as he landed beside her on another thick branch. "He seems to be stopping," Virix said. The mysterious Arakoa disappeared into a large cluster of outcast huts. A village of sorts. Cold dread pressed in around Iskar, stoking his fear. He took short, sharp breaths, hoping he would not inhale the curse that filled the air of this place. "Think about what you're doing," he kept his voice low. "The curse. We are not here to perform shadowy deeds. Rukmar will protect us. Just wait here for me." A euphoric mix of fear and excitement raced through Virix as she moved quietly behind the outcast hovels. She had meant what she said. She was not afraid to be among these things. Even in this forsaken place, Rukmar's light, her warmth, would protect her from the curse. The cloaked Arakoa stopped outside a large hut built of rotting wooden poles. Small scrolls dangled from the entrance by strands of frayed rope. He looked left and right and then stepped inside. Virix landed on a bare, crooked branch that stretched over the dwelling. Wide cuts of violet and dark blue cloth had been stitched together and draped over the hut, forming a roof. Through a space between two strips of ratty fabric, Virix could see the Arakoa. She cocked her head, listening. "Shadows gather," the disguised Arakoa said. A cloud of smoke appeared from thin air, swirling and coiling until it transformed into a flesh-and-blood outcast. Intriguing. Virix had read tales of the dark powers used by the outcasts. The one who took shape was male with dull red feathers. His fingers were the colour of ash, twisted and worn like the skin of something dead. A small red Kaleri, barely hatched from the look of it, clung to a purple and goldwork shawl that adorned his shoulders. "When the raven swallows the day," the outcast rasped. "Might I recommend a better disguise?" "Time is of the essence, Rashad. Where is the scroll?" Just a moment, the one called Rashad lowered his voice. Virix edged across the bough to hear what was being said. A little farther, a little... The branch cracked under her weight. The disguised Arakoa jerked his head up. And for a brief, unsettling moment, Virix met his eyes. Then he was gone, storming from the hut, throwing off his cloak and flying up into the canopy. Virix cursed. She abandoned all subtlety and leapt through the air, soaring over the village. Thick tangles of branches scraped at her back and wings as she gave chase. The dense woods offered little in the way of visibility. She hopped from bough to bough, swatting at leaves, eyes nearly closed to protect them from debris. Virix charged through a clump of branches and, quite by accident, slammed into the back of the other Arakoa. The pair fell to the ground, tumbling across roots and sliding in the mud. The male was quick. He was back on his feet, one of his hands raised high. Wisps of fire curdled like wind serpents around his talons as he began to call on Rukmar's power. By Rukmar, Virix thought. She recognized him. That is Ikis, an adherent. They sent you after me? The male snapped his beak, raising the crest feathers on his head to make his form more imposing. Aye. Virix fumbled for words. Who? The other Arakoa narrowed his eyes. Why are you here? I could ask you the same question. Virix slipped her hand towards the small bone dagger strapped to her belt. Her eyes never left the other Arakoa. She weighed her options. Was he an enemy of Skyreach? Or had he been sent here on official business by members of the adherents? The latter was a possibility, however remote. He was, after all, an adherent. From afar, she heard the sound of voices, the beating of wings. Branches rustled and cracked. No, Ikis whirled, gazing up into the canopy. They know. They know! He rushed forward, grasping Virix by her sun-sage raiment before she could draw her dagger. Terok, the ancient king, it is lies. All lies. What he was, what he did, what the curse is. 4 blade talons, elite warriors of the adherents, crashed through the canopy. They carried a wing blade in each hand, a crescent-shaped weapon embossed with golden filigree. It is all lies! All! Ikis's words ended in a shrill cry as one of the warriors cracked him over the head with the blunt-edged side of a wing blade. Ikis fell to his knees, gasping. A second blade talon slid a black leather binding hood over Ikis's head, covering his eyes, while another shoved a rune-etched metal ring over the captive's beak, forcing it closed. The last of the blade talons tied Ikis's arms together with a length of thick crimson rope. Virix! Iskar landed beside her. They found me just as you entered the village. It appears they had been following him for some time. And you nearly ruined our hunt. One of the blade talons approached Virix, towering over her. You are not supposed to be here. Virix had to back away to avoid getting cut by the jagged edges of the copper-hued armor that flared out from the blade talon's chest and rose over his shoulders. We were hunting ravagers, she said, her voice meek. For the first time, a sliver of fear raced through her. I don't see any ravagers. The warrior made a show of looking around. He turned his gaze towards the other blade talons and pointed at Virix. Take these 2 back with us. They have been among the cursed. The crack of Rukmar's tail thundered in Iskar's head. The whip clawed down his back like talons of fire, searing feathers and flesh. White-hot pain exploded behind his eyes. He cried out in agony, despite telling himself that he would stay silent and endure the punishment with dignity. He had made and broken the same promise yesterday and the day before. I am finished now. A soft but stern voice echoed in the dark. The blinding pain ebbed. Iskar's vision slowly returned, taking in the scant light that filled the room. A single solar orb, blazing like a miniature glass sun, hung from the top of the windowless chamber. It was one of many out-of-the-way places in Skyreach's grand spire, where the academies, ritual chambers, and disciplining rooms of the adherents of Rukmar were located. Iskar knew the latter very well. 2 blade talons turned Iskar's around to face his tormentor, High Sage Zelkir, the ruler of Skyreach, an Arakoa whose word could change law, could grant life or death, glared down at the Sun Sage. Iskar trembled in the presence of this Arakoa, the living voice of Rukmar. Zelkir wore ornate orange robes over his yellow-tipped teal feathers. The cloth glittered in the solar orb's light, a subtle enchantment woven into the fabric that reminded Iskar of the sky at sunrise. In his right hand, the High Sage clutched Rukmar's tail. Intricate gold filigree spiraled around the scepter. From the end dangled 3 long tendrils of sizzling fire. "You have disappointed me, adherent Iskar," Zelkir said. "It was not my fault," Iskar wanted to scream. I tried to stop her." But he could not argue with the voice of Rukmar. "It will not happen again," Iskar replied. "I promise you that." "How often have I heard you say that?" Zelkir sighed. "I will try harder." Iskar bowed until his beak touched the floor. "By Rukmar's grace, I will try." "We shall see," the High Sage said. "I have a task for you, an important one. Anything. You will watch Virix, observe her activities, where she goes, whom she speaks with, what she does. Report to me directly should you notice anything unusual." "Unusual?" "She was among the outcasts. A sun priest performed purification rites on her, and so we are in no danger from the curse, but it may have some lingering effects on her mind." Something about this troubled Iskar. Had that heretic, Ikis, done anything to her? Iskar was not sure what the fool had been up to, but it was not his place to ask. If the High Sage had deemed that information important to Iskar, he would have already been told. "Yes," Iskar nodded. "I am yours, High Sage. I am yours to command by Rukmar's will." Later, Iskar wandered out onto one of the many open terraces of the Grand Spire. He winced as his feet touched the stone platform, each step sending a jolt of pain up his back. No one paid him any mind as he hobbled forward. A handful of adherents milled about on other parts of the terrace, almost all of them discussing news of Ikis and his capture. Iskar ignored the discussions and made his way to a giant brass sundial that towered at the center of the platform. Notches around the edge of the device denoted different times of the day. Whenever the shadow of the sundial fell across one of these notches, all of the adherents would stop to whisper their thanks to Rukmar for sharing her light with the Arakoa. Iskar repeated the invocations to himself, making up for the ones he had missed while receiving his punishment in the disciplining room. When he was done with his prayers, he found a spot at the edge of the terrace and leaned against the gold-plated railing. A strong breeze whipped over the platform, tussling his hood and sending the embroidered banners that hung from the terrace above into a frenzy. A crimson Kaleri landed with a squawk on the railing. Iskar stroked the bird's feathers and breathed deep, trying to relax, trying to make sense of the last few days. Below, a sea of green, red and yellow forest stretched in all directions, broken only by the rising stone talons of Skyreach. Arakoa soared through the air above and below where Iskar stood. Among them were pairs of young adherents. Iskar wondered whether any of them had been given the same task he had, to watch over your clutched brother or sister. That was a normal part of life as an adherent. It was the purpose of placing the followers of Rukmar in pairs. They were trained to watch for symptoms of the curse. Lethargy, tardiness, questioning the orders of elders. Those were the first warning signs that the affliction was present, ideas ingrained in all Arakoa from the moment they hatched. But to actively spy on your clutched sister's every action and report it, that was something else. Was he betraying Virix by doing this? Or was he protecting her? Lies. All lies. That voice had dogged Virix's thoughts over the last 3 days. She had spent that time isolated in her roost. That was the punishment handed down to her by the High Sage. Each day a sun priest had come to perform purification rites to purge any lingering remnants of the curse that she carried. Through it all, Virix's thoughts had remained on Ikis. She had no sympathy for the heretic. According to the Sun Priest, Ikis had been conspiring with the outcast against the adherents. He would be exiled in a few days. His wings would be cut and he would be cast out. He deserved that, and much more. But what had driven someone like Ikis, someone so gifted and respected among her order, to throw away his life? And what was that scroll he was after? How could something like that be dangerous? The mystery gnawed at her, haunting her. She could not rest until she discovered an answer. So on the day she was released from isolation, she found herself drawn to the deepest corners of the great archive of Skyreach, surrounded by old and dusty tomes. Virix rubbed her eyes, leaning back from the stack of books on the table of the reading alcove she'd claimed. It was one of the many carved into the stone walls of the archive. Outside, hundreds of teardrop-shaped nests, filled with tomes and scrolls, hung from the walls, spiraling up the length of the chamber. Kaeleri soared to and fro among the nests, delivering books to visitors and replacing those that had been left in the reading alcoves. She watched the highly trained birds for a while, thinking about everything she had read. There was something here, she knew, something not quite right. Virix leaned forward, again reading through a passage about Terok she'd found in On the Histories of Ancient Kings. It told the story of the legendary Arakoan king Terok, who had once ruled over Skyreach. The tome recounted his many crimes and depraved acts. It painted a picture of Skyreach under his rule as a time of suffering and tyranny. Only when the brave adherents of Rukmar rose up to challenge Terok did this tragic era end. They overthrew the king, casting him out of Skyreach and liberating all Arakoa from oppression. Rukmar then turned her back on Terok. He became an outcast, shriveled and maddened by the curse. This was not new to Virix. She had heard the story countless times. What was strange was that every historical account she read about this event was worded the same. On the histories, Terok's tyranny, Rukmar's deliverance. These were documents supposedly written decades, even centuries apart. Yet their chapters on Terok were identical. Virix imagined Ikis sitting in the archive, reading over the same scrolls and books she was. What had led him here in the first place? More importantly, where had he gone afterward? That the histories were identical was odd, but that did not tell her anything new. She needed to find answers elsewhere. The Great Archive was public, open to all Arakoa, but other repositories of lore existed, caches of rare tomes accessible only to the adherents of Rukmar. Virix tapped her talons against the table, thinking. Plumbing the archives of the adherents would be far more difficult than coming here. The sun scribes who watched over those hallowed places would question her sudden interest in Terok, and that could raise suspicion among the elders. That would be a challenge, she thought, a sliver of excitement racing through her. Virix stuffed the scrolls and tomes in a small basket hanging outside the lip of the reading alcove. The Kaeleri would come later to put the writings back in their correct places. As she leapt from the alcove and began flying up towards the entrance of the Great Archive, her thoughts turned to Iskar. She'd been so obsessed with this mystery that she hadn't sought him out. The Sun Priest had told her of Iskar's fate. 3 days of isolation and lashes from Rukmar's tail. It was her fault, and she knew that her punishment was nothing in comparison. She promised herself that she would not involve her clutch brother in this new investigation. Virix would seek him out later, she decided. Now she had questions to answer. From the shadows of his reading alcove, Iskar watched Virix fly away. He had been following her ever since her release from isolation. The High Sage had not forbidden him from speaking with her. Iskar simply chose not to. He did not trust himself to keep his task a secret. As he watched her go, a tiny voice in his head urged him to tell her about his orders from the High Sage. But still another voice, a much louder one, commanded him to obey. He did. When he was certain Virix had left the Great Archive, Iskar emerged from his alcove, soaring down a circle through the library. He drifted to the alcove at the lowest level, the one Virix had spent so many hours in. Nearly all of the other reading spaces were open, so why had Virix chosen the one at the bottom? Why had she sought one so secluded and distant? A Kaeleri reached the alcove just before Iskar. It began poking its beak through the basket hanging outside. He shooed the bird away and then unloaded the scrolls and tomes. Iskar read each title as he sat them side by side atop the table. Strange. They were all histories about the time the adherents had taken power in Skyreach. The problem was that Virix did not like history, unless it had something to do with the lost Apexis culture. These types of books were Iskar's speciality. Scholarly pursuit was one of the few things he had ever excelled at in his life. A low, uneasy warble rumbled in Iskar's throat. He looked at the largest tome, On the History of Ancient Kings, in his hand. He held up the closed book, examining it from all sides. He could tell from the way the spine was bent what page Virix had spent the most time reading. It was a trick an older adherent had once taught him, a way the elders verified whether their underlings were studying the chapters and sections that they had been assigned during their schooling. Iskar flipped to the section Virix had been reading. A single name stared up at him. Terok. For the next 2 days, Iskar became Virix's shadow. He followed her path, observing her every activity. She never returned to the Great Archive. She did, however, spend many hours alone in her roost. Afraid that he would appear suspicious, Iskar did not attempt to spy on her during these times. But he had a good idea what she was doing. From what little he knew of her research, Virix had been looking into the old King Terok and the story of his exile. That alone was not cause for alarm. From the time Arakoa were hatchlings, they learned about Terok. But the manner of her research, the elusiveness and secretive nature, was odd. Virix seemed to avoid contact with other Arakoa whenever possible, emerging only late at night. Were those not signs of the curse? Iskar did not want to believe so. Rukmar adored Virix. She was blessed. Wouldn't the sun god protect one so gifted as Virix from the curse? The question weighed heavily on Iskar as he soared to the highest levels of the Grand Spire for his meeting with the High Sage. He had lain awake the night before, wondering what he would say to Zelkir. What could he say, other than the truth? Iskar located the High Sage on the spire's highest terrace, a platform inlaid with coloured glass arrayed in the pattern of a giant plume of feathers. Above, ornate banners and glimmering sunstones hung from long wooden shafts, embedded in the rocky face of the spire. The decorations were beautiful, but Iskar found no joy in seeing them. His attention was focused on one thing, a cage of iron, shrouded in black cloth, dangling from a wood pole directly over the terrace. Ikis was within. He had been there ever since his capture, and there he would remain, alone and in the dark, until the day of his exile. An elder sun sage had enchanted the black material that covered the cage to expel and ward away heat and light. That was part of his punishment, to be so high, to be so near Rukmar's embrace, but to experience none of it. Iskar shuddered at the thought of being cut off from the sun like that. He had heard that Arakoa would go mad from being locked in the cage. They would pluck out their own feathers. For a moment he imagined Virix in that cage, put there because she had shown signs of the curse. Iskar's heart ached with a terrible sense of loneliness. "Adherent Iskar," High Sage Zelkir said. Iskar forced his eyes away from the cage. He kneeled, bowing his head. "Rise." The High Sage beckoned him to come closer. "What have you learned?" "I've been watching her," Iskar replied. "And?" "And she has changed." The High Sage did not show any sign of surprise. He remained stoic as always. "In what way?" "She is... well..." Iskar hesitated. "She is reformed, more dutiful and obedient than ever." The lie just spilled out, as if someone had taken control of his mind and body, someone he did not know. But even as he spoke, even as Iskar reeled in the shock and apprehension, he did not stop. "She has spent her time reciting prayers to Rukmar. I've seen it with my own eyes." "Are you certain?" Zelkir asked, fixing his gaze on Iskar. At any other time, that gaze would have withered Iskar and sent him begging for forgiveness. But something unfamiliar, something exhilarating, surfaced from beneath the self-loathing and shame that usually ruled his thoughts. For the first time in his life, he felt strong. The High Sage, the most powerful Arakoa in the world, believed him. Iskar, who had been the object of scorn among his peers, so often passed over by his elders, had power over the voice of Rukmar. "I am certain." Iskar's words were even and unshaking. The High Sage turned away, waving him off as one would a Kaleri. "Continue your watch." Once he was away from the terrace, Iskar's strength vanished. A wave of panic seized him. "What have I done? Rukmar, forgive me." He landed on a small platform lower on the Grand Spire to catch his breath. His stomach twisted in knots. He feared for a moment that he would hack up his morning meal. It was for a righteous purpose, he told himself. He couldn't take the lie back, but he had won a second chance for Virix. If he could turn her away from whatever foolhardy path she'd set out on, if he could save her, then it would all be worth it. The soft song of wind chimes drifted across Skyreach. Virix heard it from within her roost. She knew what it meant. The heretic would be exiled tomorrow at the break of dawn. Virix was surprised that it was already happening. She had lost track of the days, and she had little to show for it. Her research had led her nowhere of substance. She had rifled through the adherent archives to the best of her ability, but had found only references to lost texts about Terok, writings deemed apocryphal by the adherents. Whether they existed somewhere in Skyreach, Virex did not know. She paced in her small roost, wondering what to do next. The place was in disarray. Bedsheets dangled out from the lip of the cocoon-shaped nest that hung from the ceiling. Open tomes and scraps of parchment littered the floor. Her reading table was cluttered with broken Apexis artifacts, tools, quills, and bowls of half-eaten, rotting food. But the fact was, she simply didn't care. Reaching a dead end like this infuriated her. It only made the mysteries hold over her stronger. Nothing else mattered. Virex, a voice called out from outside the door to her roost. Through the cloudy glass windows on either side of the entrance, she could see Iskar perched in the alcove outside. Virex let him in, feeling guilty about her days of avoiding contact with her clutch brother. Iskar. She considered a few different excuses, harmless lies to explain why she'd been keeping to herself for so long. I'm sorry I haven't been out to see you. The Sun Priest... no more lies, Iskar cut her off. He barged into the roost. I know what you've been doing. Virex was silent for a moment. She wasn't sure what to say. Finally she asked, How? How? Because the High Sage ordered me to find out. To watch you. He thinks... Watch me? Venom laced Virex's words. And you didn't tell me? Will you listen? Iskar moved close, lowering his voice. He was afraid you were cursed. Cursed? Virex chirped with laughter. You can't be serious. I didn't believe him. That's why I kept your research about Terok a secret. Iskar turned away from Virex. He let out a long, tired sigh. I lied to the High Sage. That surprised Virex. She had never imagined Iskar would have the courage to do something so bold. It is not a good thing, Iskar said, as if reading her thoughts. Just tell me why you were researching Terok. Virex considered this. She decided that Iskar deserved the truth. Virex explained what had happened with Ikis in Vale Acras, his meeting with the outcast, and the cryptic words he had spoken before his capture. Then she recounted her findings about the similarities among every account of Terok's fall. Is it not strange they are all the same? Virex asked when she was done. Perhaps? Iskar circled the reading table. He sniffed at the bowls of old food and reeled, shuddering. But if the event was clear, the histories would depict it accurately. There is a difference between accuracy and... Virex trailed off, unsure of how to say what she thought. And what? Iskar prodded. And fabrication. Iskar shook his head. It's evidence of good record-keeping. What exactly are you looking for, anyway? I don't know, Virex said. Perhaps that scroll Ikis was after. Perhaps the answers are there. Iskar's talons raked through the feathers on his head. Why would you believe the heretic in the first place? He wanted to manipulate you, cast doubt into your thoughts. He spread his arms, gesturing at her squalid chambers. You've become obsessed, crazed. Clear your mind and prepare yourself for the exile tomorrow. I don't need you to watch over me. Virex momentarily let her annoyance get the better of her, and the words came out much harsher than she intended. But she found herself growing tired of this talk. She was wasting time she could be spending on her research. Iskar's eyes widened with disbelief. It would be nice for once if you thought about the consequences of what you do, if you thought about how they affect others. Anger rose up in Virex, and her voice was a sharp screech. I never asked you to lie for me. Iskar stared at her, and she could see the hurt in his eyes. Without a word, he turned and stormed from the room. Iskar! Virex called after him, but he was already gone. She went to the window and watched as he flew away through a dozen red Kaleri circling in the air. Virex knew she should be thankful. She was. He had taken a great risk for her. But she couldn't stop, not when there was still a chance to find answers, however slim. Before dawn, almost every member of the adherents of Rukmar gathered in the ceremonial chamber of the Grand Spire to witness the glorious exile. As was tradition, the elder adherents took their positions along the edge of the chamber's stone and crystal platform, where the ritual would take place. They stood in perfectly ordered rows, staring forward at a pair of blade talons who held the heretic by chains attached to his wrists. Two massive stone statues of Arakoa, holding crescent-shaped scepters adorned with solar orbs, looked down on the condemned. The rest of the adherents perched along ledges above the platform. They organized themselves by vocation. Iskar took his place among a cluster of sun sages on the eastern side of the ritual floor. To their right were the sun scribes. To the left were the martial blade talons. Stragglers trickled in, hoping no one would notice. Someone would. Someone always did. They would feel the fire touch of Rukmar's tail when the exile ritual was over. Iskar searched the crowd for any sign of Virix but saw none. He was still angry at her, still furious about her selfishness, but also concerned. Was she so foolish as to miss the exile? He didn't think her obsession was that extreme. He was beginning to regret not checking in on her. A hush fell over the adherents as High Sage Zelkir arrived. He was adorned in brilliant ceremonial garb, silver bands of sharp-edged armor that curved around his shoulders. Atop his head he wore a crown of jagged metal, shaped like elongated talons. Zelkir marched forwards, the talon of Rukmar clutched in his right hand. Gold thread wrapped around the shaft of the long staff, which was also decorated with gems the colour of a clear blue sky. Topping the weapon was a curved stone blade. It was a holy relic from ancient times, said to have been made from Rukmar's own quills and talons. The High Sage stopped before the heretic. Ikis, still wearing his blinding hood, looked much thinner than the last time Iskar had seen him. Patches of his feathers were missing, as if he had torn them out. The once brilliant red of his plumage had faded into a muddy crimson. Behold! The High Sage raised his arms. Outside, the sun was starting to rise. Light cascaded through a yellow-tinted crystal dome built into the top of the grand spire. Gold rays shimmered across the polished brass and copper surfaces in the chamber. Before long, everything in view seemed to glow with Rukmar's light. Dawn has come, the High Sage continued. Rukmar has returned for another day, just as she always promised she would. Her light will grace the skies and shield us from the dark. All that she asks in return, all that she has ever asked, is for us to embrace her will. And yet here stands one who has turned his back on her. He was a friend to some of you, a teacher, a member of our own order. His name is Ikis, and he bears the curse of the outcasts. A low warble rose from among the other adherents. Iskar looked through the crowd again for Virix. Where are you? The High Sage raised his voice to silence the adherents. Let this be a reminder that we must remain vigilant, for the curse can sink its talons into even the greatest among us. Ikis, who once held so much promise, had conspired with the outcasts to tear Rukmar's gift from us, and leave in his wake only shadow and despair. I wonder then, what need does he have of wings if he has shut his eyes to Rukmar's light? What need does he have of wings if he would rather walk the mud among his ground-dwelling allies than soar her glorious skies? The High Sage approached the heretic, signalling to the nearby blade talons. They stepped back, pulling tight on the chains connected to Ikis, forcing his hands out to the sides, palms up. Ikis's crimson wings stretched out beneath him, his feathers almost touching the ground. He has no need of his wings, for he is no longer a child of our most precious and benevolent god. High Sage Zelkir raised the talon of Rukmar. He positioned the weapon's curved blade near the heretic's armpit. Slowly, Zelkir slid the talon of Rukmar along the underside of Ikis's arm, stopping at the inner edge of the wing. Then, with one practiced stroke, he swiped the blade across the length of Ikis's arm. The talon ripped through feathers, skin, and bone alike. Blood spurted across the floor, pooling in its intricate crystal and stone design. The heretic's wing fell limp to the ground. Despite the metal ring binding the heretic's beak shut, Iskar could hear muffled screams. The High Sage's eyes drifted over the adherents, and for a moment they settled on Iskar. This is the fate that awaits all who turn away from Rukmar, Zelkir said. Then he began his work on the heretic's remaining wing. Vale Acras. Virix crept through the forest surrounding the village. She wore a thick grey robe, something she had not brought from Skyreach, a necessary precaution she had convinced herself. She had not been followed, not to her knowledge at least, but she was not going to take any chances. That was why she had chosen to visit Vale Acras during the exiling ceremony. Right now the High Sage was severing Ikis's wings. Soon the Blade Talons would carry him from Skyreach and cast him to the ground, where he could then live among the outcasts. The adherents would remain in the Grand Spire, celebrating Rukmar's greatness well into the night. Virix kept her head low as she continued through the woods. She moved from shadow to shadow, avoiding groups of outcasts that milled about. She saw more than she had the first time she'd come into the village. Back then, her focus had been on following Icus. She had ignored much of her surroundings. Now she took in everything. A stench like mildew and rot choked the air in the village. The outcasts hobbled about, body disfigured by the curse. Everything about them was perverse, obscene. Virix felt ill from watching them go about their lives. She found the hut she'd tracked Icus to, the one with the small scrolls dangling from the entrance. She watched for any sign of the outcasts. When she saw none, she moved inside the dilapidated dwelling. No one was there. Woven baskets shaped like teardrops, filled with mouldy tomes and scrolls, swayed from the wooden rafters. "Hello?" Virix said. Nothing. What was it she'd heard Icus say? Shadows draw near, shadows abound? Shadows gather, she spoke softly into the empty hut. Thick smoke coiled in the air in front of her, coalescing into the silhouette of an outcast. The shadowy form clarified, becoming tangible. Before her eyes, Rashad appeared, the tiny red Kaleri perched on his shoulder. "When the raven swallows the day," Rashad said. "And who might you be?" "One of my kind came here to retrieve a scroll. I am here in his stead." Virix stepped close to the misbegotten Arakoa, pulling back the hood of her cloak and raising the feathers on her head to intimidate him. "Where is it?" "Ah, you were the one following him," Rashad replied. The casual, almost mocking tone in his voice grated on Virix. "What makes you think I might give this scroll to you?" In the space of a single breath, Virix drew the bone dagger from her belt and thrust it against the outcast's neck. "I can be quite persuasive, and I..." She stopped speaking, feeling something sharp digging into her chest. Virix looked down. Rashad had a small black dagger, holding it like a Kaleri talon, pressed against her. "I may be a scholar, but that doesn't mean I'm a fool," Rashad said. "Perhaps not." Virix slowly reached out towards the Kaleri chick with her free hand. She grasped it. "But I must ask you to lower your blade and give me what I want." Virix squeezed the Kaleri. The bird chirped in pain, thrashing helplessly in her palm. "Enough, enough!" Rashad withdrew his dagger. "I was merely verifying your intentions. If I thought you an enemy, I would not have shown myself. You spoke the correct words." Virix released the Kaleri. She pulled her dagger away but kept it in hand. What did the words mean? "They are part of a lullaby from a time before the Divide." Rashad spread his arms, gazing at his surroundings. "Before the curse, when the Arakoa was something more, when they were wiser." He dug into his tattered robes and withdrew a roll of old parchment. A leather sheath, dyed purple, covered the paper. "With this, perhaps that time can come again." Virix took the scroll. She turned it in her hand, examining the faded runes scrawled across the sheath. "I doubt that you were truly a friend of the other Arakoa who came here, but the fact that you are here, that you would risk exile, tells me enough. You are a truth seeker. In these times, it is so rare to find one from up in the spires," Rashad said. "That scroll can change everything. Bring us together again." Bring us together again? Was this fool really thinking? A chorus of sharp screeches from outside broke Virix's line of thought. She left the hut, tucking the scroll into her belt. Outcasts were fleeing in all directions. Overhead, something large scrambled through the crimson and green-leaved canopy. Something with wings. Virix cursed, shedding her disguise so that she could stretch her wings. She flew over the huts of Vale Acras. She landed without grace on a tree just beyond the village, scattering a dozen Kaleri that had been preening themselves among the branches. Before Virix could take wing again, a hand clawed at her arm. She whirled, knocking her attacker away while at the same time summoning a ball of Rukmar's fire in her palm. Then she saw him. Iskar. Her clutched brother stared at her, arms splayed wide, grasping tree branches to steady himself. "You should not be here!" His attention shifted to the scroll tucked into her belt. "Is that what you risked so much for? What is it then?" I'm not sure yet." As Virix spoke, the rush of excitement she had been feeling ebbed. Fear and disgust took its place. She realized how foolish she sounded, how foolish she'd been. Only when they had returned to Skyreach and reached the safety of Virix's roost did they dare open the scroll. In the light of a solar orb, they read over the old parchment. It was a compilation of many ancient documents. The largest portion dealt with Terok and his daughter, Lithic. It was a markedly different version of events from the one Iskar and his kind had learned growing up, the one depicted in the archives and in the other official writings. For starters, none of the histories he had ever seen mentioned that Terok had a daughter. In this version, he had not been a tyrant but a glorious king, a kind-hearted and brave ruler. The adherents of Rukmar had held a great deal of respect during that era, but they had lusted for more power and prestige, and only one thing stood in their way: Terok. The adherents overthrew the king to achieve their goals. They apprehended him, Lithic, and the king's closest allies. They dropped them from the sky into the pools of Sethek Hollow, Virix read aloud. Sethek Hollow? Iskar knew of that place. It was forbidden. A swampy mire east of Skyreach that, according to the adherents, was steeped in shadow. Legends said that the malevolent god Seath, the enemy of Rukmar, had died there in ages past, tainting the land with his blood. Without her wings to keep her aloft, Lithic did not survive. The fall shattered her bones. Terok, however, did survive, Virix continued. Upon touching the cursed waters of the Hollow, he contracted the curse of Saith. The waters, that's the source of the affliction. That is the source. The strength seeped away from Iskar's body. Was this true? Could it be true? The elders had taught him that the curse was the result of falling from Rukmar's grace, the result of disobedience, among other things. It was something brought about by one's own weaknesses, not by outside force. But this document said its source was the waters in Sethek Hollow. That meant anyone, regardless of their virtues, could fall victim. It meant that everything Iskar knew was a lie. The curse addled Terok's mind, and he began to wither away, Virix said. The same fate befell many of his followers, whom the adherents also expelled from Skyreach. They became outcasts. With Terok gone, the adherents gained complete control over the Arakoa. Virix set the scroll on the reading table. All this time. A cold anger welled up in Iskar. He had lived his whole life under the belief that if he maintained his faith, if he observed every law, he would be free of the curse. All of the punishments he had endured to prove his devotion, all of the torment and hardship he had suffered. What had everything been for? We don't know if any of this is true, Virix said. You said the same thing yesterday. How do we know the outcasts didn't fabricate this to manipulate us? We don't know, Iskar said. But he would find out. If this document existed, if it was genuine, there would be others. Apocrypha, hidden away in the heart of the Grand Spire. Scrolls and histories lost to time, concealed by the elders. Clues, secrets, truths. But if this is true, he continued, then this will change Skyreach forever. Virix paced to her window. Dozens of Kaleri swooped through the night sky outside. They cawed and screeched, landing on natural rock ledges along the spire. Beyond, the terraces of Skyreach glowed in the light of solar orbs. Virix was, in that moment, taken with its beauty. We must destroy it, she said, turning to Iskar. Destroy it? Her clutch brother stared at her in disbelief. We must hide it somewhere. This could ruin everything. It is too dangerous to keep around, Virix countered as she moved towards the scroll. Iskar did the same, slamming down his hand on the parchment. If this is true, it means everything we've been living for is a lie. Isn't that important to you? You went through all this trouble to get it. You risked everything, and now you want to destroy it? What I did was foolish. The mystery, it just consumed me. She grasped one edge of the scroll's wooden roller and pulled. Iskar pressed his hand down, holding the paper in place. Forget about this, please. Forget about this? Iskar's voice was shrill. With his free hand, he gripped the other end of the wooden roller. How could I forget about this? Because it doesn't matter. Virix tightened her hold. Even if it's true, it doesn't matter. She thought then of Vale Acras and the outcasts. So much filth and decay. So much hopelessness. She tried to imagine a world where her kind lived with the lesser Arakoa as equals. Every image she conjured in her mind's eye left her feeling disgusted. Skyreach was powerful and glorious. To change it, to mend ties with the outcasts, would destroy everything she knew. Despite all of the tedious rules she had come to loathe as an adherent, all the meaningless study and rituals, she did not want to lose her way of life. What else in the world would ever compare to it? You did not walk among the outcasts as I did. Virix pulled on the scroll. She was stronger than Iskar, and she could see her clutch brother struggling to maintain his grip. If you hadn't, you wouldn't be entertaining this thought. If keeping Skyreach as it is means upholding this lie, then it's worth it. With a final tug, Virix ripped the scroll from Iskar's hands. Her clutch brother tumbled to the ground. Virix summoned a wisp of Rukmar's fire in her palm, igniting the scroll. Tendrils of flame licked up around the edges of the old tattered paper. No! Iskar lunged forward, swiping at Virix with his hand. She blocked the attack with her forearm and struck Iskar across the side of his head. He sank to the floor. As the fire consumed the scroll, embers and ash rained down around Iskar. On his knees, he scooped the ashes into his hands. How could you do this? It is for the good of the Arakoa, Virix said, turning back to the window of her roost. Her breath caught in her throat. A handful of Kaleri were perched outside both windows. They sat there, completely silent, watching her through the cloudy glass. Odd. She had never seen them so focused. Virix's stomach twisted with icy apprehension. Something large bashed into the door of her roost. Once. Twice. On the third time, the door burst off of its hinges, crashing to the floor. 2 blade talons poured into the room, wing blades at the ready, followed by High Sage Zelkair. For the good of the Arakoa, the voice of Rukmar said. Indeed. Virix took a step back, startled. Then she bowed her head. High Sage. Always a curious one, weren't you? Zelkair said. He motioned towards Iskar. Bind him. One of the blade talons sprang forward. He shoved a blinding hood over Iskar and then tucked his beak shut with a metal ring. Iskar did not make a sound, nor did he fight back. Virix summoned the courage to speak. He's not to blame. I know what he did, and I know what you did. Zelkair flung open Virix's window. He reached towards the group of Kaleri perched outside. The High Sage stroked the feathers of one bird. It cooed softly. I have been watching, Zelkair continued. To see through the eyes of the Kaleri is a rare skill, but I find it so very useful from time to time. You would be surprised what some of our kind say and do when they think they are alone. And you would let us go on like this? Virix asked, a flicker of anger burning away her fear. It is only natural to pursue a mystery. The question is what you do with the knowledge you discover. That is what defines you. Those of us who rise through the ranks of the adherents are burdened with many truths, many secrets. Only the wise can keep them concealed for the good of the Arakoa. Zelkair shooed the Kaleri away. They took off into the night sky. I believe that you have that same wisdom. You have the potential to become something great within our order. Virix wasn't sure how to feel. Was she meant to be thankful at a time like this? But there is that matter of your restlessness, your penchant for rebellion. The High Sage placed a hand on her shoulder. Fortunately, there are ways to correct such flaws. The other blade talon gripped Virix's arm from behind, twisting it back. Needles of pain stabbed through her skin, shooting up her neck. Out of instinct, she struggled, but it was in vain. I have always been too lenient with you, and for that I apologize. Perhaps if I had been stricter, it would not have come to this. But I want you to know that everything I do now, I do because I admire you, because I have faith in what you can one day become. Virix screamed as the blade talon slipped a blinding hood over her eyes. Darkness swallowed her world. Virix did not know how long she had spent in the darkness. Days, weeks, a lifetime? The truth was she did not care. She only wanted it to end. Mercifully, it did. Someone pulled the blinding hood from her head. She found herself face to face with the High Sage. Virix said nothing as he gently helped her to her feet and then led her through a winding catacomb somewhere beneath the Grand Spire. Do you know why I made Iskar your clutch brother? The High Sage asked. Virix's time in the darkness had muddled her senses. It took her a moment to understand the words. She tried to reply, but all that escaped her beak was a low moan. I knew he would never really learn from you, the High Sage continued. I thought watching over him would teach you some responsibility. Perhaps it did, in a roundabout way. Your decision to burn the scroll was wise. It was responsible. She followed the High Sage into the main chamber of the Grand Spire. Rays of light flooded through the crystal dome of the roof. Virix arched her back and sighed in relief as the light washed over her, warming her body. More than food or water, she had desired this. Light. She found herself reaching up for the light, wanting nothing more than to touch it, to hold it. There wasn't enough in the room to satisfy her. There would never be enough. Not in all the days of her life. But I realize now that responsibility was not the thing you needed to learn, the High Sage said. What you truly needed was to understand the meaning of consequence. The words pulled Virix out of her euphoric stupor. She noticed the 3 Arakoa standing in the middle of the chamber. 2 blade talons flanked Iskar, holding him by chains that shackled his wrists. His beak was still bound shut with a metal ring, but the warriors had removed the blinding hood, allowing Virix to see him, and him to see her. The High Sage passed the talon of Rukmar to Virix and then stepped back. She weighed the sacred artifact in her hands and looked around the room. No one else was present to watch. This was not like the other banishment ceremonies. This was something far more private, far more secret. Will you live in light or shadow? The High Sage spoke softly behind her. Virix stepped forward, staff in hand. Iskar stared back at her. He did not move. He did not make a sound. His eyes held not a trace of fear, only anger, cold and brittle. She placed the blade under his outstretched right arm, and she made her choice. A brief silence passed after Rashad finished his tale. The other outcast rose from the tree stump, stretching his crooked back as best he could. I've never heard that story about Iskar. He always was born into the lowest rung of society. I imagine it is not a tale he enjoys telling. And as you know, he is somewhat partial to lies, Rashad said. He got to his feet as well. His joints popped from sitting idle for too long. These old bones. The High Arakoa remained perched on the fallen tree. Rashad allowed him time to reflect on things, on a story of the leader he had once sworn to serve until the end of his days. Rashad thought back to when he had met Virix in Vale Acras. If only I had known at that time what she would become. With a single thrust of my dagger, I could have saved so many lives. Of course, it was foolish to think that. He hadn't known that Virix would become the High Sage of Skyreach. He hadn't known that her obsession with Apex's technology would drive the High Arakoa to build weapons, like that false sun atop their city. He hadn't known that Virix would give the order to turn it on the outcasts, to burn them from the surface of the world. Virix and her closest followers were dead now, but they had represented all that was wrong in the world. High Arakoa obsessed with the light of the sun, lost to fanaticism. Rashad had to remind himself that the outcasts were not blameless though. They had found refuge in a different set of extremes. They had become obsessed with the shadows, buried in shame and self-loathing. Shadows gather when the raven swallows the day. Burning sky is extinguished as black wings fold gently about the heavens. Rest, my children, rest, for even the sun must sleep. The ancient Arakoa had known that having light and dark in equal measure was natural. Only together would the outcasts and their winged cousins succeed. Now, finally Rashad's kind was realizing that. Most of them, at least. He wasn't sure if some, like Iskar, had seen reason. Iskar's life, much like Virix's, had changed after he discovered the truth about Terok. Although crippled and exiled, he had risen through the ranks of the outcasts and become their leader. In recent years, Rashad had sensed something dark growing in him. A quiet longing for vengeance and power. Perhaps it had been born during those final days in Skyreach. Had Iskar woken up like the 2 Arakoa in Rashad's presence? Had he put the past to rest in favour of a new future? Or was he still trapped in the old way, still stumbling through the shadow? Rashad! A High Arakoa alighted near the storyteller, a panicked look in his eye. We found the scouts sent to Iskar. They are dead. Dead? The elder Arakoa asked. Killed. By Iskar. Others are continuing to search for him, the messenger said. The storyteller sat back down on the charred tree stump. Idly, he upended the pouch of seeds and nuts and spilled the contents across the ground. Percy cocked his head in confusion. He looked up at Rashad as if expecting some kind of trick. Eat up, eat up. Rashad gestured to the food. Such glorious things were to come for his people, he knew, but it was not yet time to celebrate. There was work to be done, remnants of the past to overcome. You will need your strength in the days ahead. We all will.